We are Lagos Talks 91.3.
Let's talk.
So you're welcome to the conversation with Trust Shoninamsa, and today is going to be a really, really interesting one. Over the weeks, we've been hearing a lot about the Taliban, Afghanistan, the United States involvement, where it all started, how it is going wrong or right. And we've listened to speeches from various quarters, from Joe Biden, from Democrats, from Republicans, and blame game has been going back and forth from Trump to Joe Biden to the Afghanistanis to everyone, right? So it is very, very pertinent we brought this to the fore and have a proper discussion around it. And joining me to have this very, very, very important discussion, because it definitely will shape the international scene for us to see how this can transcend into the Nigerian scene, and to see if, because we face maybe similar situations, if you might call it that, with our own present security situations. And with me today is a really, really good friend of mine. He's one of the knowledgeable individuals I know when it concerns international relations, when it comes to the Middle East, and basically around this whole terrorism syndicates and how they operate. He might need to reveal how come he knows a lot, because I don't know, maybe he has been a member. Okay, I can say that. But moving on. Taofeeq Sarayi, what's up?
Yeah, I'm very fine, man. How are you?
I'm all right. I know you've been following the trends. I've been seeing a lot of great takes around the Afghanistan. You've been seeing a lot of ridiculous takes. Just to start on a really, really light note, Tasa, we call him Tasa, so in case you hear me calling him Tasa time after time, but his name is Taofeeq Sarayi. So, Tasa, what is the most ridiculous take you've seen online, flooding the Twitter space or even the internet space, or even articles that you've read? What's the most ridiculous take you've heard around this Afghanistani, Taliban, United States triangle?
Well, when things come up like this, you cannot get enough ridiculous takes. Just as much as you're getting actual conversation going on, the real conversation, right. You have people on the other side who are giving a lot of takes and things that are not necessarily, substantial to what's happening on the ground. So to be honest, I think the most ridiculous take I have come across would be people, a lot. Let me put this in threes. So you have some section of people who think that a victory for Taliban is necessarily, a defeat of imperialism, right? Secondly, you have on some other side as well, people who suddenly care about vulnerable women and children in Afghanistan all of a sudden, right?
Right.
And maybe the occupation of Afghanistan for more than 20 years, was something that women and children there benefited from, those kind of things. And largely the ridiculous takes, they have been somewhat the most popular takes, somehow. Because the way our media hegemony works and the way the media is shaped, it's shaped around those who actually control, the voice of what we want to hear, right? So you can be very certain about how, this entire debacle, coming from the hegemonic media, has been a lot of whitewashing, right? Of crimes on all ends, right? On the Taliban end, on the US forces end, on NATO, all of those people, right? So it just takes people to actually devote time to actually checking the inside story, to actually know what's going on in Afghanistan, right? So that's why we're going to stop right now.
Awesome. So let's start quickly. Let's segue into the crux, right? So Tasa, I really love you to shed more light, or maybe the word is not even more light. Shed light on how we all got here. 20 years ago, what were the signs, and how come did we degenerate into this situation where we then have a full-blown, maybe from some quarters regarding them as terrorist organizations from from especially from, I don't know, maybe leftist media, as you might call it. So how did we get here, Tasa? And let's start from how did we get here first.
Okay, yeah, like the Taliban story is a lot very complex. It's even a lot very complex than what people think it is, right? Because Afghanistan has been a center of global tussle, right? Of a lot of tussles. At some point in time, it was the British. At some point in time, it was the Soviets. Now it's the Americans, right? So how we got here was, you know, in the 1980s, I think in 1980s or 1970s, you know, Afghanistan had a Soviet-backed, you know, socialist or let's say communist government, right? So, and that time was like at the peak of the Cold War between the United States and the USSR, right? And the Soviets. So it was more of like using other places as like specters of proxy wars, right? So the USSR and the USA weren't necessarily fighting themselves, right? But they were fighting battles outside of their own territories to actually gain more allies and gain more base and gain more footing in the world. And honestly, that's how the entire crisis of the Taliban came into play in the first place. Because what we know as the Taliban today are a faction, you know, or a cutout of what used to be the Afghan Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen were the ones who fought the Soviet Union during that war, right? So the Mujahideen fought the Soviets, you know, with the backing of the United States, because they had a common enemy. The United States had the USSR as an enemy, right? The Mujahideens also had the USSR as an enemy. So they agreed on those grounds. So they brought resources together. The US was supplying them with a lot of arms, a lot of technical and intelligence resources, and they fought, you know, successfully. You know, they defeated the Soviets, leading to the Soviet withdrawal from Kabul, from Afghanistan. In less than 5 years, the government fell, and it fell into the hands of the Mujahideens, and the Mujahideens had to start the government, right? So, and this is where it gets a lot more interesting.
Right.
The Mujahideen form a government, right? They become the legitimate rulers or the governors of Afghanistan, of having overthrown the Soviet-backed government of Nasrullah, right? At that point, it now became a thing of ideological inconsistency with the US. The Mujahideen were a conservative, ultra-puritanical, right-wing, you know, Islamist, you know, group, right? So a lot of things that were very prevalent in the Soviet-backed government were rolled back. So things like freedoms, you know, a lot of social and economic freedoms, things like women's rights, for example, were things that were rolled back, right? And this was a very, very big problem, right? So under a lot of pressure from like Western government, from like the USA and all of that, they didn't budge. It now got to a point where 9/11 happened, right? 9/11 happened, and it was like the biggest terrorist attack on US soil. It killed a lot of people, and, you know, it shocked the entire world, right? You know, that was like a moment of, you know, the whole world, you know, aside like ideological differences, aside like political divide, everyone knew that this was a big catastrophe that has happened. This was a big terrorist event that's happened on the United States soil, like right at the center of the global financial capital, New York, World Trade Center. That was very, very big, right? So for US to now go after the culprits and deliver justice to the culprits of this particular war, it was very crucial for them to actually get the culprits, right? And at that point in time, intelligence reports were saying that the Afghan government, the Taliban, you know, were the ones who were providing safe haven for Osama bin Laden at that point in time. There are conflicting reports, right, as to the agreements between the Afghan government and the USA at that point in time. Some reports say that the Taliban government at that point in time, they were ready to release Osama bin Laden to US forces, providing US forces could provide evidence that Osama bin Laden carried out those terrorist attacks. At that point in time, Bush didn't care. Like, it was just like, see guys, screw all of this. Just give me this guy or I invade you. At that point in time, the Taliban didn't budge. They didn't do all of those things, right? They were very keen on the US intelligence providing evidence, because at that time, Osama bin Laden was still claiming innocence. He was still saying he didn't carry out those attacks, right? Even though he later took responsibility for them, in the coming months or years. I can't really figure out that right now. So that led to the invasion of Afghanistan. You understand? Because it was supposed to be a movement to actually get Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. So they invaded Afghanistan. In a couple of months, the Taliban government fell, right? And from 2001 to date, till last 2 weeks, was what we known as America's longest war, the war in Afghanistan. Right? So that's how we got to this point, because of US global fight against terrorism, right? Even though at some point in time, they were literally allies. They were literally people that US supplied weapons with. And these are like facts that are corroborated by Hillary Clinton. If you watch like most of our clips, all of that, you see when she actually made this assertion that, see, these people that we are fighting today, we armed them in the past. We used them in the past to actually kick out the Soviets from Afghanistan, right? So we got to this point because the US was a lot, engrossed because of the atrocities that were committed during 9/11, and also the Taliban weren't going to budge with regards to providing, Osama bin Laden to US forces. So that's why the invasion happened, right? So from there, it was now a thing of rebuilding. After, after overthrowing the Taliban government, it was now a thing of rebuilding Afghanistan. So what US did to actually rebuild Afghanistan was to provide some form of quote-unquote democratic government for them, even though that didn't last, because obviously the government fell, not more than a week after US forces left, Afghanistan, right? So that brings a lot of question about the viability of like US presence in Afghanistan at that point in time. Were they really building Afghanistan, or were they just there to actually extend, their tentacles of global imperialism? Very big question.
So, in all said and done, after this extensive summary you've given us, the question then will be, with all the summary you've given, will it be fair for people to say United States were part or wholly the reason why Taliban exists in the first place?
To a very large extent, that's very true, and to a considerable extent, that's very, very true, because the way the international system works, right, especially when it comes to like the global play of people wanting to like exert their dominance, that's what we call it, right, trying to like police the world, right? It means that in the vast majority of instances, people have to ally with people that might not necessarily align with their own values, as long as there is a common enemy or there is a common ground to agree on. And that's what happens, and that's what happened between the United States and the Taliban. Because as much as the United States will try to like paint itself, as like some beacon of democracy, some beacon of freedom, at some point in time, they allied with reactionary forces, with ultra-puritanical Islamist reactionary forces within Afghanistan to actually achieve a goal of sending out the Soviets and reducing Soviet dominance, quote unquote, within that particular region, right? So, in as much as we want to like claim notoriety on the Taliban and say, oh, they are very brutal and all of that, we also cannot remove the fact that at some point in time, that iconography that they enjoy, or that kind of cult of personality that they enjoy today, was something that was brought about because of their alliance, with the United States, right? So that very good concession, that very brilliant concession has to be made for, any kind of conversation around how Taliban became a thing in the first place, for us to actually have that kind of conversation, right? So we have to arrive at that kind of conversation because, the entire debacle the entire problem that is being witnessed in Afghanistan right now wouldn't have been a thing right now if, that alliance at that point in time didn't happen. Maybe, just maybe. Or even if Taliban exists today, maybe they wouldn't exist on this large scale, on the scale of them actually going out to actually say they want to confront US forces, they want to confront NATO, they want to take over, a government that is backed, by these forces, right? So maybe they will have been like, let's say some, rickety group that will have gone out of, out of our entire, sense, at some point in time. But right now, them becoming very big and becoming a thing to actually fear, a thing to actually sit down and start making concessions with. You understand? A thing to actually, start making agreements with. It is a very, very big, issue on the side of the United States.
Awesome. So now, since you concede, right? Let me not use the word concede. Or since you agree that the United States formed a large chunk of why the Taliban exists, be it even like best case scenario or worst case on this large scale, will you then say that, and this is we bringing justice to the fore, and let's speak on ideology, right? Do you think that it was the right decision then for we to then withdraw the United States Army from Afghanistan, owing to the fact that you guys were one of the reasons why these guys started this whole trouble in the first place?
Okay, sorry, I didn't get that the United States should withdraw their army.
Do you think that the United States were right in withdrawing their forces from Afghanistan, owing to the fact that they were one of the reasons, or even the major player in ensuring that Taliban exists today in this large scale? Do you think it is really, it was a good move for Joe Biden to withdraw the troops?
Okay, so this question will get like a multifaceted answer, right? Because from an outsider perspective, you should have your answer. From an insider, as an Afghan, there definitely is an answer. And also, from the United States perspective, there is an answer, right? And I'll take this.
Let's go with the three answers. Let's go with the three answers. We really love to have it.
Yeah, I'll take this one after the other.
Yeah,
for the Afghan, it's two things: to live under a foreign occupation and a US-backed puppet government, or to live under the Taliban. These are literally two evils, right? You are now, left to choose one of both. Because if you look at it, the material conditions of the average Afghan didn't necessarily improve over the last 20 years of the war, right? Over the last 20 years under the US-backed Afghan government of Ashraf Ghani and Ahmed Karzai, right? So, to a very large extent, the places were impoverished. They were more of a lot of infighting, drone attacks, no peace and security, and that had a very, very huge effect on the economy. Afghanistan is a landlocked nation. They largely depended on aid coming from the West, coming from world donors, UNICEF, UN, for that much time. So it means that their material conditions didn't improve over that period of time, even though they were under US occupation and also a US-backed government, right? Secondly, if you live under a Taliban government, it means that some certain inalienable rights, will become a thing of question, right? And also, the Taliban being like the kind of group that has been ascribed to being like a terrorist group means that they definitely will suffer from some sort of international backlash that they're already suffering from right now. Because right now, the US is saying that, foreign reserves that are pegged, if the foreign reserves that belong to the Afghan government that are pegged in the US dollar will not be released to the Taliban. And that means something. That means sanctions, right? That means economic sanctions that would determine and that would translate into harder lives for the average Afghan people, because it's not necessarily going to affect the Taliban only, right? It's going to affect, the average, person on the streets of Kabul, on the streets of Kandahar, right? So it doesn't get better for the people of Afghanistan. It doesn't get better. It only gets better, if and this is a very big if the Taliban can show to the world that first they have changed from their first time in 2001 to now, they have changed, and also if they can build a fairly moderate society where they can guarantee the rights of the average Afghan people and also improve their material conditions socially, economically, and politically. And that means building like an inclusive political system where all Afghans can participate, right? That's one answer. So secondly, from a US perspective, it made so much sense to actually leave the war, right? Because first, they were losing a lot of men. They were losing a lot of, soldiers, a lot of personnel, right? And again, they can't fight the war forever. You can't fight the war forever. A war that has lingered for 20 years literally means that you can't win that war, right? And as history has shown, you don't necessarily win a war via sophistication. So you can have all of the dollars in the world. You can have Raytheon, you can have Boeing, you can have F-35 stealth jets, but you can't win a war with those things, right? Even if you are fighting the most ridiculous and the most crude army in the world on their own soil, right? It means that at some point in time, you have to make concessions. And that's what I think the US has arrived at, making that concession that, see, we can't fight this war for long. It is costing us taxpayers' dollars, and let us just end this and, get some form of political concession from Taliban, with regards to moving forward, right? From an outside perspective, it brings a lot of questions that, see, can we depend on foreign occupation when we have problems within our own circles, right? Can we, have things like, terrorism, right? And say the only solution to it is continuous militarization, and aggression against those forces. These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves, as people who are looking at this from the outside, right? And, from a more pragmatic angle, is that how do we solve existential problems that exist in our society, ideological differences and all of that? So when it comes to asking the question about the withdrawal of troops, there is no, definite answer, right? Because to the American, yes, we can't keep fighting these wars. I can't keep losing my brothers. I can't keep losing my family members because of an endless war in Afghanistan. For the Afghan, it's a thing of a dilemma, right? That we can't necessarily choose, right? We can't say our lives were better under US occupation, so they should stay and continue their occupation and war against Afghanistan or be against the Taliban, or say that, our lives will be better off under the Taliban, considering their precedents when they were in power before, and considering how the outer world would relate to them, right, with regards to the economy and with regards to improving material conditions, right? So we don't get a definite answer. The only answer that would come, right, that we'll be able to say would be how Afghanistan moves forward from this particular chapter of their history, right? In the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, let's see the life that the Taliban would build for the average Afghan. Then we will now see if it was a good thing for the US to leave or if it was a bad thing for the US to leave. Thank you.
All right. Looking at it from the United States point of view, right? Would they say that they are wasting taxpayers' money and all of those stuff you mentioned, right? Do you think that really matters when you then put into consideration that these same taxpayers' money were what was used to stop the war in the first place, right? Do you think that that's a consideration to say, okay, you know what? You guys didn't care when the war was started, right? When you were starting the war. Why then are you then concerned now about the men you lose and all of those stuff? Aren't you supposed to have projected to know that, when you feel someone we just have common enemy, not necessarily common alliances, don't in future? Do you think that bulk lies in the dominance of the United States citizens to say, you know what, people don't have any moral grounds to then speak of losing men and losing manpower and losing resources because it all started? What do you think?
Okay, so this is also a multifaceted question, right? Because you have to put into consideration the political divide within the US itself, because the US is not a monolith, right? They are not because the war actually had opposition even when it started, right? There were people within the USA who felt like the war was unjustified, even though popular perception at that point in time was that they should go to war, right? But the perception lingered over the years and it changed. From a pro-war stance, people began building some forms of political consciousness that, see, we don't necessarily have to go to war to actually solve these problems, right? We can solve these problems through engagements, through dialogue, through, participating fairly within the international space, right? Everybody got to see America, as not necessarily a beacon of hope and democracy, but rather as a police of the world that was as a police of the world that was fixated on policing the world, that was fixated on increasing its imperialist tentacles, right? Those were the ideas that people started, jumping on as the war lingered on. So this is the big question, right? If we have at some point in time, I'm talking now like from the perspective of an American, at some point in time, lost, $2 trillion, fighting this war, lost more than 2,000, armed personnel, with a lot of casualties on both sides, right? On the side of the average Afghan casualties, at what cost do we have to go on with this war, right? Here is a Taliban that is not willing to budge, and that is, at an increasing pace, winning territories and controlling swaths of land within Afghanistan. Because if you look at the entire thing, it wasn't like the US had so much control of Afghanistan, even though they had boots on the ground, even though they had their forces on the ground. It was a tussle. The entire country was divided over, some parts were controlled by US forces, some parts were controlled by the Afghan government, backed by the US forces, and some parts were largely controlled by the Taliban, right? And some parts were even controlled by some warlords, right? Because Afghanistan wasn't under some central leadership. They were scattered, right? So they weren't necessarily winning the war, right? They were just there to actually, keep their presence there as, as the USA. And people are even saying that the USA lied, because they kept feeding the world intelligence community that, see, we're winning this war. We're winning this war. Taliban will be crushed in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks, in a matter of months, like that. And it became a lot very interesting that the first day you pull out, in a matter of weeks, the government that you have backed and the forces that you have trained fall. Then what have you been doing for the past 20 years, right? It is just to show you that no matter how much resources you spent, the war was going to a dead end. It wasn't going to be won by them, right? So they pulled out at the point where it was still, honorable. Let me say that, even though it wasn't honorable in the vast majority of instances, it was still honorable to pull out, get a deal with the Taliban, and make sure that, the transition would happen at that time, right? Because if they stayed longer, you can't predict what would have happened to their forces. You can't predict what would have happened to their intelligence architecture within that particular space. It was going to be the Taliban's, dance after all, right? So that's just how dicey and how multifaceted the issue is at that point in time. So it begs the question that, can we really, assign, blame? Can we really assign victory? Can we really assign all of these things at this very crucial point in time? I don't think so.
Nice insights there, Tasa, and nice one you pointed out. So let's now talk about the fall of the Afghan government and the military. Concerns have been raised that how come do you say that you didn't even try to fight after the United States left? So and just this formed part of the speech of Joe Biden when he said that these people need to fight for themselves. Why do you think, two questions, why do you think the Afghan soldiers refuse to even put up a fight against the Taliban? And two, do you think that this same issue is down to maybe corruption from the internal circle of the Afghan soldiers?
Oh, yeah, this is a very good question, because this was because as I said earlier, that the entire narrative that has been sold to us during the particular war was a sham, right? Because the entire narrative was, see, we are building Afghanistan. And that included we are building the security infrastructure to last when we withdraw, right? So that was the idea, right? So it now begs the question that, see, what happened? Like, that was very fast, right? Because we don't expect that you've been training some force for the past 20 years and some guerrilla groups who are largely outnumbered would just come and see no resistance, right? Like, they literally walked, into Kabul with no resistance, right? The forces laid down their arms and everybody fled. So very good question is this. Can we believe the USA when they say that they were actively arming and giving support to the Afghan forces? The answer is they weren't doing that. They were a lot more concerned about their own presence there and about their own security there than maintaining the security of Afghanistan for the Afghans, for the Afghans. And this is very crucial, right? Because if you say that these guys didn't pull up a fight, there's a lot of factors that have been tied to that. Because first, how do they fight when the US is at the back door making deals with the Taliban? This is a very big question. And like, just imagine this from a very simplistic angle. You claim to be my own ally, saying you're giving me security, you're giving me weapons, you're giving me training, you're giving me intelligence. But at the same time, you're making backdoor deals with people who you are supposed to be training me to fight with. Because the Trump regime made a deal with the Taliban saying, see, we'll stop fighting and we'll pull out. And when we pull out, just assure us that you won't become a safe haven for terrorists, so they can't attack the US mainland or our allies within the region, right? But at the same time, you are assuring the Afghan forces that, see, those Taliban guys were supporting you, we're giving you arms, we're giving you weapons, so they will never win. But here is you already conceding defeat and already going to meet them for some sort of deal with them. So it begs the question that, at what point do you think the morale to fight of the Afghan forces will be at an all-time high with that kind of, context, right? They weren't going to fight that kind of contest when the people that they see as allies were pulling out, and not just pulling out, they were already making concessions with the Taliban. Then it becomes a lot very difficult, right? Because like nobody's going to fight under those kinds of circumstances, right? Because it looks like you had knifed them, you had kicked them in the back, and you left them on a ditch, right? And you now left them on a free fall, right? That's what it looks like. It was some sort of betrayal, right? Because the day that the US forces left Bagram Air Base, which is like the air base that the US used for their air support, air forces, all of that. They left in the middle of the night without even telling the Afghan superintendents, the Afghan commander of that particular air base. All right. So it showed you, there was a break in the link of coordination between the US forces and the Afghan forces. And that heavily dealt a blow to the morale of those soldiers. So they weren't going to give a fight. It wasn't going to be a fight, right? It was something that they were going to lose anyway. Even if they were going to win, that action itself meant that this fight wasn't wasn't something that we were going to die for, right? Seeing that their allies were going, behind them to make deals with the Taliban. So that's the answer there. With regards to corruption and all of that, yes, there were reports of corruption within the ranks of the Afghan government and also the Afghan security forces, right? The Afghan army. At some point, we heard reports that when the president fled, when the president Ashraf Ghani fled, he fled with like a lot of tons of, millions of dollars, right? So that's just to show you about how, the state of the institution in Afghanistan were riddled with a lot of inadequacies and corruption. And that itself led to, people not necessarily rallying around them to actually save that government, right? Because nobody was willing to give a fight, for that government to be saved. Because the government itself wasn't popular with the people, It was a government that was riddled with a lot of corruption, inadequacies, mismanagement, and they just weren't doing anything for the Afghan people.
So, Sasa, can you hear me?
Definitely, bro.
Yeah, okay. Fantastic. So if the United States says that, they spent trillions of dollars in fighting the war and they've lost a lot of manpower and all of this, maybe all of this stuff, or maybe excuses, why then do you think that they will just maybe leave the Afghans to fall? Why then do you think that, what would have prompted them to say, you know what, we think the best way to go is, we think the best way to go is to ensure that is to leave the Afghans and maybe be disloyal to the Afghans and start spending a whole lot of resources to ensure that the Taliban are done away with?
Okay, so a couple of things there. The tax dollars that we're saying here didn't necessarily waste, right? Because those that were involved in the war materially made a lot of gains. The MIC, the military industrial complex of the United States, made a lot of gains, right? If you look at the portfolios, the capital portfolio of the likes of Raytheon Tech, of the likes of Dynamics, Tech, Boeing, right? Lockheed Martins. These are companies that made tons of money, from this war through military contracts, weapons sales, intelligence, etc. Right? And these are US companies. They literally took money from the public purse and put it into private hands, right? Their shareholders became billionaires and millionaires overnight via proliferation of the war in another space, right? So if you are saying that that amount of money has been spent to no end, we have to be nuanced about the end. Was the end to win in Afghanistan? That's debatable. Was the end for the MIC to become as strong as possible, right? Then that's it. They are rich. They made tons of money and they have transferred wealth directly from public purse to private hands via all of these military contracts, right? That's on one side. But secondly, and more importantly, is on the side of the USA, they had certain objectives going into Afghanistan. First, to track and deliver justice, quote unquote, to Osama bin Laden. Has that been done? Yes. But Osama bin Laden has been killed, right? Secondly, to make sure that Afghanistan doesn't become a safe haven for terrorist groups. Has that been done? To a very large extent, yes. Because the key concession that Taliban made in the deal with the USA to, allow for the withdrawal of US forces was that you guys are not going to allow Afghanistan become a soft landing space for terrorist groups. And in the past, Taliban themselves have fought terrorist groups. They fought ISIS within Afghanistan. And ISIS-K, the ISIS faction in Afghanistan called ISIS-K, has been under the radar of the Taliban, and they have been fighting them for a very long time now. Osama bin Laden is dead, right? So, from what you call it, from a foreign policy perspective, and from a counter-terrorism perspective, right? It's a big win for them, right? And from a more capitalist perspective, for the companies that were involved, it's a big win. Those who lose in this war are the victims of this war. Those that died, those that got displaced, those that have now become refugees, right, via this war, and those that have to suffer, the PTSD and the brunt, of this war, right? And those are ordinary Afghans, right? So, to a very large extent, the US wasn't, just as Biden said, they weren't there for peace building, they weren't there for nation building. To be very honest, even though they say those things to actually sound cool, that we are championing democracy, we're trying to liberate those people. Those things are just liberal extravagance that they say to actually manufacture consent from the entirety of the world so they can continue their militaristic presence in those places. But on a more pragmatic level, they have done what they had to do, to secure themselves to a very large extent. Right. So on that basis, it's a very big win for them.
Awesome. So Tasa, let's now merge security and politics. Let's see if we can bring a middle ground with both. If you understand, in the time of Trump, right? Trump went out of a lot of treaties, like he disregarded the Paris Treaty, disregarded the United States and Iran agreements, the lack of purification of nuclear weapons and all of those stuff. Do you think that this leaving Afghanistan or making peace treaties, or if you call it that, with the Taliban, the whole political landscape of leaving deals that you originally pledged to, and maybe leaving some even international organizations, do you think this in any way have something to play with the United States international relations and the trustworthiness, especially with the Europeans, about trusting the United States to have your back in terms of difficulty in war situations, or even just mere social treaties and peacemaking missions?
Oh yeah, this is a very fine question, because the Afghan issue actually redefines, international alliances, right? And it begs the question for those who actually have alliances with the US, for them to reevaluate their alliances, right? Because to a very large extent, some of the countries that were part of NATO, who were also part of the military force in Afghanistan, didn't want the withdrawal, right? Countries like the UK. But because this is the thing, the international system, these countries for me are not necessarily allies of the United States. They are puppets of the United States because they do the bidding of the United States. So when it comes to, you can only reevaluate your allyship with someone who you see as like a considerable, colleague, or like a considerable, someone you're at par with. But you can't reevaluate your relationship with someone that is bigger than you, especially when you have no alternative. Because this is the point you have to make. This is the concession you have to make here. If the UK, Germany, France, and all of these countries that occupy the G7, that we can call the West, right? If they say that, we can't trust the USA anymore, what are they going to trust when it comes to international security and all of that? When it comes to enhancing their own imperialist, footholds around the world? Are they going to trust Russia? Are they going to trust China? Definitely no. They are still going to run back to the United States, regardless of whatever inadequacies the United States is putting up with, right? Because because they definitely wouldn't go to Russia. They definitely wouldn't go, especially on a security perspective. When it comes to economics, they can say, like screw the USA and say they want to ally with China, blah blah blah. When it comes to global security, when it comes to maintaining a hegemony over arms trade, over warships, over IP, when it comes to building a very crucial security infrastructure, they definitely would depend on the USA, because the USA has made itself indispensable, right? The USA has made itself indispensable, because if you look at it, the USA has made itself like the emblem of support for the West, regardless, even if it's given out. Because look at during Trump's regime, right? That he vowed to stop giving support to NATO. He vowed to reduce US forces in Germany, in South Korea, saying they had to renegotiate the terms of security. These places, it literally led to some staggering, right? It led to some very difficult phase within the bilateral relationship that existed between the USA and these countries, right? That's just to tell you that these countries depend on the USA for their own security, for their own, when they want to voice things on the more global scale, they depend on the United States of America, right? So as much as they are going to be a lot more skeptical going forward with the relationship, they still have to toe the line of the USA, because they have no alternative. right? So that's just a very difficult situation that they have put themselves right now.
Awesome. So when we started this show, Sasa, you made mention of people thinking that the more or less victory of Taliban, we'll call it that, will be an end to imperialist movements and imperialism in general. Why do you think that this definitely is not in any way, anytime soon, bringing an end to imperialism?
Oh yeah, first, considering the antecedents of the Taliban itself, they are products of imperialism, right? They are products of, the global tussle to actually maintain foothold, in the global south. So that means that a product of imperialism cannot be said to be a victory against imperialism. Anyone who says that kind of thing means that you're not doing the right retrospection into how they came into being in the first place, right? So, and that's a lot very crucial nuance that people have to understand. But more importantly is that they are not living as a result of, let's say, defeat. They're living as a result of concession. Because the Taliban and the US still has a working relationship, Even though they don't have an absolute working relationship, they have a relationship on certain grounds, right? They have a relationship on certain things, with regards to counter-terrorism, of course, right? So, I don't think it's a victory, against imperialism, because we can't count it as a victory against imperialism if, the Taliban can assure us of better material conditions for the Afghan people that would be a lot better than what the US occupation offered them. Then we can now say, oh, this is a victory. But we can't do that now. That's a lot very, very early for us to actually ascertain now. So anybody that is clowning about how, the US losing that place and the US, going out is some necessarily victory against imperialism, doesn't necessarily know how imperialism works, right? So that's it.
So let's quickly go back, lest I forget, to an interview conducted by Al Jazeera around the Taliban and the plans they have for social rights, especially for women and children.
Oh, yes.
We also saw how the Taliban's, the individual who spoke said that, they have working relationship with the United States and all of those stuff. So first, I would like them to see the video. So watch this video.
The consultations are ongoing, and of course it is going to be an inclusive system. We are in talks, and we have a relationship, a working relationship with the Americans about the security arrangement. And the outside checkposts are in our control, and inside is under the control of the United States forces. And they're in constant contact with one another. It is very unfortunate for people to be rushing to the airport the way they are at the moment. I think it would have been much better, because we have announced general amnesty for everyone, the security forces from senior to the junior level. And this fear or this hysteria that has taken place is unfounded. The developments were so fast that all people were taken by surprise. And when we entered Kabul, and it was not pre-planned, because we announced initially that we do not want to enter Kabul, and we want to reach a political solution before entering Kabul and making a joint and inclusive government. But what happened was that the security forces left and they abandoned their places, and we were forced to ask our forces to enter and take over security. The point of intra-Afghan talks was precisely that we come to an agreement about what those rights actually entail. Sharia law is known to everyone, and there's no ambiguities about the rights of women, the rights of men, not only women, but also the rights of men and children. And right now we're at a situation that hopefully during the consultations there will be clarifications about what those rights are. Our foremost priority is discipline in our own ranks, and not enforcing laws on others, but enforcing it on ourselves first, and then giving it as an example for the rest of society to follow suit. So we are the first ones, and our members, if they are involved in such things, will be the first to be prosecuted. Well, I don't think people believe we are terrorists. I think it's just the war on terror. It was just a term coined by the United States, and anyone that did not fall in line were labeled terrorists.
So what do you think about the video and the interview conducted by Al Jazeera?
Okay, so first is that the Taliban is doing a large-scale, what I would call whitewashing. Like they are trying to like rebrand. Yeah, that's the word. They are trying to like rebrand, right? Rebranding from a very toxic, conservative, ultra-puritanical, reactionary movement that they had in 2001 to now a more socially progressive movement, right? So because if you look at what they did, right, first by declaring amnesty for everyone, right, even though you fought on the sides of the US Army or you fought against them or you were like a translator for like US forces or anything at all that they could have considered crimes before, now they say general amnesty for everyone. So meaning that they are extending a hand of friendship to every Afghan, saying, oh, come and be part of this government, right? Also saying that, oh, they want to form an inclusive government, going on to like consult former members of the former regime, right? Like Ahmed Karzai, Abdullah, those people saying, oh, we want to form a government, we want to seek their opinion, we want to seek their consultancy, right? These are things that they wouldn't have done before. Also, sitting on the table to like make political concessions, with the USA, saying, okay, we're not going to allow ourselves to become footholds for terrorists within the region. Another thing that they wouldn't have done before, because those were things that were out of, scope for them. And now saying that, oh, we're going to respect women's rights, we're going to, allow women work, we're going to allow women attend schools, we're going to make sure that we keep everyone in check, and we're not going to allow, the breakdown of law and order, all of that. It is just to show you that, see, it looks like, because these things have not started transpiring, so I would say it looks like that the Taliban has studied the times, and they have seen that for them to actually align themselves with the world, and for them to get some level of acceptance, things that they didn't get during their first time in power, they have to align themselves with some sort of progressive values, right? Progressive values like respecting women's rights, etc. We can't be very certain that they would respect those values, right? But to hold them for their word, right, we can say that we are getting a new face of the Taliban in government right now. But that itself will be, evaluated when they kickstart, when they form the cabinet and they kickstart and they start rolling out policies, they start rolling out laws, for holding them for their word. Decent, branding, I would say.
All right. Just one part of that video that struck me was when he said that majority of people on ground don't regard them as terrorists, that the United States just sold them to be terrorists to the world. I don't know if I should ask if you think that is true, because I don't know how much you have like the insider knowledge of what's on ground in Afghanistan. But do you think that this is down to, if that is true, more or less, do you think we have a problem with picking a narrative from the West, especially, which is how the media works, and running with that narrative? If the Taliban saying that, oh, we are not terrorists, most people don't see us as terrorists, and all of those stuff.
This is a very important question, because it has caused like a lot of uproar, right? Especially around those who see the victory of the Taliban as something very important, for that particular region, right? Because we have to be nuanced here. At some point in time, the Taliban were seen as freedom fighters when they were in the good books of the USA, right? They were seen the way you would see those who fought for independence. Like they were literally getting Mandela status, right? But at the point where they had like ideological backlash and they had like ideological inconsistency with the USA, who were like their main, funders at that point in time, then quickly the media narratives turned into terrorists, right? This is the point we have to make here. First, who are those who get to define who and who is terrorists, right? If the people on the ground in Afghanistan, according to that guy, says that, they don't see us as terrorists, it now begs the question that who are terrorists? What do you do for you to actually be considered terrorists? Because if you look at Taliban is fighting terrorist groups. Taliban is fighting ISIS. So what are you going to call that? Terrorists fighting terrorists? Or, so these things are a lot very, very nuanced, right? That's why I say the situation there is a lot very complex, right? Because if you ask me personally, considering the kind of media narratives that I have been exposed to, Taliban definitely qualifies as terrorist group. But if you look at it from another angle, all of the nuances around how they became a thing and all of, how they operate and how, all of those things and how they've been government before, then you start to wonder that, are these guys really terrorists? Or they are just people who are fighting US occupation of their own land, right? So there is a lot of nuance around this thing. And this is why, as much as we want to like listen to the news and listen to like media narratives, especially from hegemonic Western media, we also have to listen to people on the ground, right? People who suffer the consequences of those tags, right? Because it's very, very crucial. To what extent can we say people are terrorists? What can people do for them to actually get all of these labels, right? Because it now becomes because when you say people are terrorists, right? And these are terrorists terrorists will now become people formulating policy in a country now because they have become the government now. Are they still terrorists? Because the point of being a terrorist is that you constitute harm to a legitimate government on the ground, right? But these are the government on the ground right now. So who are they terrorizing? You understand? So there's a lot of nuance, a lot of complexities around how we judge this particular situation. And to be honest, as much as we want to like listen and also want to like ascribe some atrocities to them, we have to be very, very careful of whose information we are regurgitating, so we won't be doing free work for the empire, right? So this is a lot very, very crucial for us, right? So that's how that is.
That it is a really, really important thing because the whole essence of this whole interview is to bring it home so that people understand the times we live in, right? So it was really, really important to form that context, the whole lengthy context and discussion around this for people to understand what it is so that it's easy for them to relate when we're bringing it home. And really, really important, and we've done a really, really marvelous job on that. So the question I want to ask you now, Sasa, in Nigeria, should we be scared?
Oh yeah, like definitely in Nigeria we should be scared, but our scare should be about the actual things, right? Because Nigeria, for example, we are a nation that has like similar problems. We also have like the problem of terrorism, right? We have like terror groups who are, wanting to like run over the entire country. So on that basis, we should be scared. But also, we should have our facts, right? The Afghan situation is not the same with the Nigerian situation. It's very, very distinct, right? Very, very distinct situations. They are not the same on a lot of levels. First, you don't have a foreign actor on the ground, right? You don't have the USA as an occupying force. Like let's say fighting Boko Haram, for example. You don't have that. Secondly, and more important, is that the terrorist groups that we are fighting, they are not the same with regards to ideology with the Taliban, right? As much as we want to like very, very scared of reactionary as like some sort of victory that can also inspire them to actually do things, right, within our own, geographical space. we also have to pay attention to the nuance, right? All of those things that exist in Afghanistan, we don't have them here. The presence of the United States, the presence of a US-backed, forces and government and all of that. But that's not to say we shouldn't be scared. Even if the Taliban didn't win, we definitely should be scared of terrorists. Because before the Taliban won in Afghanistan, or they made governments in Afghanistan, we already had terrorists making so much gains within the Nigerian space, right? Just yesterday, terrorists attacked our defense academy, right? This is something they would have done regardless of a victory in Afghanistan or not. So, as much as we want to be scared, not necessarily be scared of the victory of the Taliban in Afghanistan, we should be scared of the fact that we are not doing so much to actually, buffer our security. We are not doing so much to improve the material conditions of people within those regions and making people see no option in the good life, but seeing option in taking up arms, seeing terror as a viable option for them to actually improve their material conditions. These are the things that should be getting us scared, not necessarily the victory of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Because victory or not, our societies, our communities are being, won over via terror, right? Bandits, quote and unquote, are running over entire communities, kidnapping 300, 400 people in broad daylight, even before the Taliban, announced victory in Afghanistan. These are things that we should be scared of, right? These are things that would happen if we don't improve our security infrastructure, regardless of a Taliban victory, right? These are the things that should not make our entire government sleep at night because of the fact that we have not succeeded in protecting vulnerable people within our communities. The Taliban can do whatever they want to do in Afghanistan. The Taliban is not going to supply arms, to Boko Haram or all of that. Boko Haram is a lot more likely to get arms from the Nigerian army through one territories, right? If the Boko Haram overruns a military barracks, for example, it means that the arms and the supplies in that military barracks becomes the property of Boko Haram. It means that the Boko Haram is a lot more likely to get arms, to get weapons from even the Nigerian army than maybe arms or support will come from the Taliban. So why are we not talking about the inherent difficulties that we are facing within our own systems here than being concerned about, a possible victory of the Taliban, miles and miles away, right? So I'm not saying we shouldn't be scared. Definitely, we were scared before. Now, we definitely should be a lot more scared, considering the way that terrorist groups, and bandits, quote and unquote, who I think are terrorist groups as well, have been running over entire communities within the country. Thank you.
Talking about how we should tackle these terrorist organizations. And this might be my final question to you, Tasa. Owing to the fact that we've seen the failure of the United States in Afghanistan, and we've seen United States invade somewhere like Libya, and how they also infiltrated Iraq, and all of those historical antecedents. Now, Tasa, do you think that it would be wise of us to maybe solicit for international aid? If no, how then do we self-sufficiently fight these terrorists that is seeming like we won't be able to win at the moment?
This is a very, very brilliant question, honestly, because the conversation came up 2 months or so ago when our president, Muhammad Buhari, tried to solicit for the relocation of the African base, to Nigeria, or somewhere where they can actually, look at the entire security infrastructure. This is a very big problem, right? Because what the Afghan story tells us, and what we must learn from the Afghan story, from the Libyan story, or from the Iraqi story, is that your problems can never be solved by the United States. Because something is very peculiar about all of these, places, is that at the point where the United States invaded and left, these places were left as shambolic places. They were left as wastelands, right? And no material conditions were improved for the people on the ground. Libya today is not necessarily somewhere we can look up to when it comes to all indexes of human development, right? Neither is Iraq, neither is Afghanistan, or neither is anywhere where the US has stepped its toes to actually enforce some form of military occupation, right? It means that no matter how much problems we actually face today, our solutions do not lie within the confines of the Pentagon. Our solutions lie within ourselves and what we can do to actually solve those particular problems, right? So if we say that we are facing the problems of Boko Haram, etc., we can call for international support, definitely, because for the most part, we don't even produce weapons in Nigeria that we can say we want to use to fight all of these weapons or all of these wars and all of that. So definitely we can call for support when it comes to military infrastructure, intelligence, etc. But those supports would only transpire into something good if you can weaponize them for public good, which is ending terror in those places and improving the lives of those places, lives of the people who live on the ground in those places. So they can never opt for terror as an option, right? So all of these do not lie within the United States. Because if you look at everywhere, look at North Korea, South Korea, the war that happened that led to the demarcation of those countries, it was largely due to infiltration of foreign forces, the United States supporting an end and one end not budging to the United States. Look at Libya, look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan, even look at Latin America, where the US had some footprints of military invasion. We think and we know that with precedents, all of these things have shown us that local problems will only be solved by local solutions, right? They can never be solved by the attraction of those foreign forces to now keep boots on the ground, right? These are things that are very, very peculiar to all of the places where you had foreign invasions, right? The problems of Nigeria would only be solved by Nigerians. If you want to solve terror today in the north or in the south or anywhere where terror is actually confronting us, we know what to do, right? We know how our societies are made up. We know, who to actually talk to, where we can actually get some sort of concession. If you have to make political concession, we have to make them. If restructuring is what's going to improve security, we have to do that. If state policing is what's going to improve security, we have to do that. If we have to reorganize the economy, right? So that people who are at the bottom half of our societies now start making some gains, from the excess surplus that lies at the top, right? We have to restructure the economy, right? Our solutions are things that we can do, but our political elites will not do them because it means that that's a threat to their own continuous existence as a political elite. And that's the biggest issue. Because if we get US forces now, it only means security for our political elites. So because when things come crashing, they can take the next jet and go into asylum or go and live in their newly bought houses in Dubai, in Washington and all of that, leaving the people on the ground to actually cater for the mess, just as we are seeing in Afghanistan right now. Their political elites left, their presidents left, right? Those that stayed were those who just wanted to stay, not that they didn't have the means to actually leave. That would be the same situation as well if we keep proliferating ideas like foreign military presence within the country. Thank you.
Fantastic. Sorry, I said that might be my final question, but something just popped, and I think it's right to ask here. Owing to the reports we got from Afghanistan, because we're drawing this link from Afghanistan, Taliban, United States, drawing it down to Nigeria. Owing to the report that we heard that there are a lot of inside military officials who were double-faced, right, fighting for the Taliban and as well trying to fight for the Afghanistans and maybe collecting salary or monies from the United States and all of those stuff, which people allege that is one of the greatest reasons why they didn't even bother fighting, because they sold their intelligence to the Taliban and all of those stuff, right? Does it scare you, or do you know, or do you have a feeling that the Nigerian situation might just be similar, where we have people who are fighting, who are for this terrorist organization, but in the trenches or in the middle, in the thick of things of the Nigerian military, serving intelligence to these terrorist organizations in Nigeria, be it bandits, Boko Haram, whatever you might call them?
Oh yeah, definitely. This is I think this is like standard procedure when you have like wars, right? When you have wars, you have double-faced people who are literally working for both sides. You have spies, right? So that's something that we have to work on. You know, it means that we have to buffer.
Before you continue, I also want to throw in, do you think our politicians that are in power presently are among them?
Oh, first, like, I don't want to be like a conspiracy theorist, so I will speak based on the facts and also based on the theories, right? The facts and the theories. So, have we, as a people, have we had like instances of, you know, people being double-faced during times of war? Yes, definitely. We have a history. Like, we have like precedents. It means that if we have precedents, we have to look out for those things again if they pop up, right? And if we're not looking out for them, it means we're setting ourselves up, right? Because those things will definitely happen, right? With regards to our political elite, definitely we could have instances where they are working for those who, you know, are adversaries of the nation, right? It means these are things that can happen, and these are things that, you know, even if you start like being, you know, an introductory officer into intelligence today, these are things that you will get briefed on. So if we are not walking around quickly nitpicking and, you know, plugging, you know, all of these potholes, it means that we are not doing the necessary work, right? Because fighting a war is more than guns, right? Fighting a war, for the most part, is more of intelligence, is more of information, right? And information itself is a good information is an information that doesn't leak, right? If a war is more of information and intelligence, then good intelligence that would win you a war is when those intelligence don't leak. Because when they leak, then you don't have hegemony or superiority over that information anymore to actually drive policy and to drive strategy, right? It means that those on the other hand as well also have that strategy as well. They know your plans ahead of you, right? So it means you will suffer more casualties. It means you will lose more wars, even if you have more sophistication than your adversaries, right? That's just to show you how much importance we give, you know, intelligence. So what is important is that we buffer our security system so we can pinpoint these things when they pop up. You understand? So that's just the best thing for us to do. But to say that they wouldn't exist will be us fooling ourselves, because they definitely will exist. There are people who will be swayed by material things, you know, things like, let's say, money, things like power, things like promises. There are people who might necessarily be blackmailed into providing intelligence, right? You know, they could literally, like, let's say, kidnap, you know, your family members and say, the only way that we won't kill them is for you to shut up and for you to actually provide us some sort of information. So all of those things will definitely happen. So it is binding on us as a government for us to buffer our security systems, right? To make sure that we don't have too much information in the hands of so many people. Because if you have information in the hands of more people, it means you are more likely to actually lose hold of that information, right? Of that intelligence, right? So everything has to do with how we organize our security infrastructure, right? So that's just it.
Thanks so much, Tasa, for this extensive conversation. I'm sure the viewers, or wherever you catch this, be it on our podcast outlets or be it on YouTube, I'm sure you really find this really informative. Thanks, Taofeeq Sarayi, for the opportunity. Thanks for the time. I'm sure it's going to work like us. So it's really informative. So we would like you definitely to maintain, like, if Lagos Talks with the conversation, like, subscribe, and share it with your friends, everyone, and tell them, like, this definitely has been the most comprehensive discourse on Afghanistan, Taliban, Nigeria, United States, and you most likely will find around. Thanks so much to everyone for watching, and trust Sean Inonse. It's a wrap on the conversation. Ciao, arrivederci.
We are Lagos Talks 91.3.
Let's talk.